"We can't afford to feed you anymore." My mom said it like she was announcing a weather update. I was standing in the kitchen doorway with a backpack on my shoulder. 18 years old. "Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa." My dad didn't look up from the television when she said it. "You're an adult now," he added. "Figure it out." The refrigerator behind them was full. Leftovers from dinner. Milk. Eggs. But apparently none of it was for me anymore. I remember looking at the stove where I had learned to cook. Pancakes at 12. Pasta at 14. Thanksgiving turkey when my mom said she was too tired. "You'll manage," she said, already opening the front door. The night air felt colder than it should have. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. Mom shrugged. "Anywhere that feeds you." 10 years later, I stood in a very different kitchen. Steel counters. 12 cooks moving like choreography. And above the entrance to my restaurant hung a small silver plaque. 1 Michelin star. That night the host walked into the kitchen. "Chef," she said carefully, "there's a couple at table 14 asking if they can see you." "Who?" I asked. She hesitated. "They say they're your parents." For a moment, the kitchen noise faded. Knives chopping, pans sizzling, orders being called out. All of it blurred into background sound. "My parents," I repeated. The host nodded. They asked if the chef could prepare something special. Of course they did. I wiped my hands slowly on a towel. "Did they make a reservation?" I asked. "No." "Did they ask the price of anything on the menu?" She shook her head. "They mentioned you're their daughter." That sentence sat strangely in the air, because for 10 years, they had never once used that word publicly. Daughter. "What did they order?" I asked. 2 tasting menus. The most expensive option in the restaurant. I nodded. "Serve it exactly as listed." The host looked relieved. "Of course." She turned to leave. "And when they finish," I added calmly, "bring them the bill." "Of course," she repeated. Then she hesitated. "They also said something else." "What?" "They said families shouldn't have to pay." I picked up a pan and returned to the stove. "Everyone pays here," I replied. The host smiled slightly, because the smell of butter and garlic filled the kitchen again. And I knew exactly how the evening would end. The service moved like it always did. Precise. Focused. Loud in the quiet way only a serious kitchen can be. Table 12, ready. 2 scallops walking. Plates moved down the pass under the warm lights while I checked every detail before they left the counter. Table 14 received the same treatment as everyone else. First course. Second. Third. The tasting menu took nearly 2 hours to finish. I never stepped into the dining room. I didn't need to. Halfway through service, the host returned. "They keep asking if you'll come say hello." "No." "They said they're very proud of you." I flipped a steak in the pan. "That's new." The host looked uncomfortable. "They also told their server they used to support your cooking dreams." I paused for a moment, because the only memory I had of support was my mother opening the front door and telling me to leave. "Just keep serving," I said calmly. At 9:47 p.m., dessert went out. Chocolate mousse. Gold leaf. The final plate of the tasting menu. 10 minutes later, the server returned to the kitchen holding the receipt folder. "They're asking if the chef's family discount applies," she said carefully. I took a pen, then wrote one short note on the bill. The kitchen was quieter now. Most of the dinner rush had passed, leaving only the low hum of dishwashers and the occasional call for late orders. I looked down at the receipt folder. 2 tasting menus. Wine pairing. Total, $864. My pen hovered over the paper for a moment. Then I wrote the note. Clear. Simple. No anger in the handwriting. Just truth. I closed the folder and handed it back to the server. "Give this to table 14, I said. She nodded. A few minutes later, I heard raised voices from the dining room. Not loud enough to disrupt the restaurant, but sharp enough to carry through the hallway. The server returned quickly. Her expression was caught somewhere between nervous and impressed. "They want to speak with you," she said. "What happened?" "They read the note." I wiped my hands on the towel again. "And they said you're humiliating them." I leaned slightly against the counter. "What exactly did the note say?" the server asked quietly. I repeated it calmly. Payment is required. This establishment reserves the right to refuse service. The server blinked. That's legal language. Yes. She hesitated. They're asking if you'll reconsider. I thought about the night I turned 18. The open door. The empty kitchen behind me.
No, I said.
And bring them the card reader. The card reader arrived at their table a few minutes later.
I didn't watch.
I kept working, because service never stops for personal drama. But the server came back again. They're refusing to pay. I turned slowly. What did they say? They said family shouldn't charge family. The same sentence again. 10 years later, nothing had changed. I took off my apron and stepped out of the kitchen for the first time that night. The dining room quieted slightly when people noticed the chef walking toward table 14. My parents looked older. Not dramatically. Just enough that time was visible in the lines around their eyes. Mom spoke first. You're really going to charge us? Yes.
Dad scoffed.
We raised you. I thought about that sentence carefully. You stopped feeding me at 18? I replied calmly. That's not the same thing. It felt the same. Mom pushed the bill across the table. This is ridiculous. Then you shouldn't have ordered the tasting menu. Dad leaned forward. You're embarrassing us. I met his eyes. You showed up expecting free food. That's what family does. I picked up the receipt folder again. No, I said quietly. That's what customers try. Then I placed it back on the table. The room had grown quieter. Not silent, but aware. People always notice when tension settles over a table in a restaurant. My father leaned back in his chair like he was still the one in charge. You're really going to make a scene over dinner, he said. You already made one, I replied. Mom looked around nervously at the nearby tables. They're staring. That tends to happen when someone refuses to pay. Dad scoffed again. You can't call the police on your own parents. I rested my hand lightly on the back of the chair across from them. I don't need to. Mom frowned. What does that mean? It means the restaurant has a policy. Dad crossed his arms. And what policy is that? I looked toward the host stand where the manager was already watching the situation. Guests who refuse payment are escorted out and banned from future reservations. Mom's eyes widened. You'd ban your parents from your restaurant? I thought about the word she used 10 years earlier. Anywhere that feeds you. Yes, I said calmly. Dad stared at me for a long moment. You've changed. I shook my head slightly. No, I just opened my own kitchen. The manager approached quietly. Is everything all right here, chef? He asked. I nodded once. Our guests are deciding whether they'd like to settle their bill. My father looked around again. Other diners had returned to their meals, but a few curious glances still drifted toward the table. Mom lowered her voice. This is humiliating. Dad leaned toward me. You'd really ban us over this? I'd ban anyone who refuses to pay. You're not anyone, he said. No, I replied. You're not either. That seemed to confuse him, because he still thought the argument was about family. It wasn't. It was about boundaries. The manager placed the card reader gently on the table. You can tap whenever you're ready, he said politely. Dad looked at the total again, then at the room, then at me. You're serious? Yes. For the first time that night, the confidence drained out of his posture. Mom finally reached for her purse. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled out a credit card. Dad whispered something under his breath, but the machine beeped. Payment approved. The receipt printed slowly, and something in the air shifted with it. The receipt finished printing. Mom signed it quickly, like the paper itself offended her. Neither of them looked at me while they stood. Dad pushed his chair back slowly. You could have handled this privately, he muttered. I didn't argue, because nothing about the situation had been private when they showed up expecting a free meal. Mom adjusted her coat. We won't be coming back. That's correct, I said calmly. They both paused. Dad frowned. What? I gestured toward the host stand. Your reservation privileges have been removed. The words landed quietly. No drama, just policy. Mom stared at me. You banned your parents. I banned 2 guests who refused to pay. The difference mattered. Dad shook his head. You think a restaurant makes you important? I thought about the kitchen behind me, the team, the work, the plaque above the entrance. No, I replied. It just means I feed the people who respect the table. They walked out without another word. The door closed. The dining room noise returned to normal. I went back into the kitchen and picked up my knife. Because 10 years ago, my parents taught me something important. Anywhere that feeds you matters.